All right, so this is FAB1. So while Derek's getting ready, I'll just tell you a little bit about it. This is an entry that has 6 wheels. So it has 3 drive wheels on each side. Many of the ones that you've seen so far have 2 drive wheels on each side, so the so-called modern 4-wheel drive machine. This one is designed with 6, and the difference is that the center set of wheels are 1/2 millimeter lower than the other sets of wheels. So this vehicle has the ability, when it's going on a straight, usually it'll rock a little bit, but it rocks back on 4 drive wheels, and so it accelerates really well. It brakes on 4 other drive wheels, so it brakes really well. And when it turns, it tends to turn on the middle set of wheels, and so it turns very accurately. The 4-wheel drive ones, everybody knew that they do really, really well on the straights, but we never really were sure at the beginning whether they would do well on the turns. But because we have gyroscopes on our entries, we're able to get through the turns even though the tires tend to skid. So you're turning a little bit like a tank when you're turning, because we use one motor to drive 2 wheels on either side. Whoa, that was impressive. Speaking of tank, there is an express rule that says that you can't go over the walls, you can't go through them, you can't knock them down. So the gyroscopes have made a huge difference, and when they were introduced, the performance of the entries went way up. The thing that we haven't been able to do yet is to use something inertial for the forward correction. So you might think of an accelerometer, for instance. The problem is, if you want to get position out of an accelerometer, you have to integrate it twice. So double integration is almost always a bad thing, right? Any kind of drift, any kind of offset accumulates very quickly. So in general, people have not been able to get the accelerometers to give them the inertial forward position. Sometimes, there's one fellow in Japan that uses it together with his encoders. He has encoders that don't have very many counts because he's making them by drilling holes into his drive wheel, and then he has so he has maybe 16 pulses or something per wheel rotation, and then he uses the accelerometer to tell him what's happening between the pulses. And so between the holes on the wheel, and so that's his encoder, right, and the accelerometer, he can integrate those 2 sensors and get a really good answer. And so that's a possibility. But doing straight corrections off the accelerometers has not happened, as far as I know. Yeah, so the question is GPS. The thing is, I don't know how fast GPS updates, but I just don't know. And it doesn't always work in conference facilities either. Yeah, the other thing that's been introduced a lot lately for building these is 3D printing. And so there's an entry at the end today, the second to the last one, I think, that has 3D printed wheels and motor supports and things like that. And there's a new version of this called FAB2 that has 3D printed parts. And so maybe at next year's contest, that would be a possibility. So 3D printing makes it much more accessible to people if you don't happen to work at a university and you don't happen to have a full machine shop at your disposal.
This mesh doesn't use gyro.
Oh, this is gyro-free, okay.
It'd be better if it did.
Next time. The Japanese felt that this contest was getting too easy, and so they actually introduced a half-size Micromouse contest. And so the size of the squares are 9 centimeters instead of 18, and so the entries are all half the size. But they decided to keep the overall maze the same, so it's actually a 32 by 32 grid. So that turns out to be a sea of walls, and the maze designers don't really know what to do with all of that kind of a capability. So it's interesting, but the mice are almost as fast as this. It takes them a long time typically to search, but it's quite impressive. But you have to really be a craftsman to build a half-size mouse. So what's your thought? We never know, really. Yeah, one more. Mice that don't search well are extremely frustrating because then you never get to see all the rest of the things that they can do.
Reset. Crash.
All right. It doesn't time. So after 7 runs, the timer stops. Well, we weren't trying to curse the luck. We just